You're essentially doing two things that are in direct conflict with each other at the same time, all the time. Constantly keeping an open mind to reevaluate what you're doing based on the feedback you're hearing, but also keeping tremendous conviction so that when people push back on you, you don't give up.
Welcome back to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. I'm your host, Michael Oved, and we've got a great episode for you today. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's guest. Chris Barton is the founder and former CEO of Shazam, an application that can identify music based on a short sample played using the microphone on the device, which was later acquired by Apple for $400 million. Today, Shazam has been downloaded over 2 billion times and is considered one of the world's most popular apps. Chris has also played a key role in tech history as a founding member of Google's Android partnerships team, where he created Android's mobile operator partnership framework. He also spent 4 years at Dropbox, where he led carrier partnerships and was one of the first 100 people at the company. Now, Chris is the founder and CEO of Guard, a system that detects drowning in swimming pools using artificial intelligence. He's also a motivational speaker. Chris, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So your parents were both academics, and they later started a consulting practice. How did your upbringing, how did your parents' influence shape your desire to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'd say there's sort of two key influences from them. One is that, this entrepreneurial possibilities idea where my dad, who is a nuclear physicist professor, decided to start his own consulting practice, and it's just so empowering to be able to see someone create an actual business. And then my mom became part of that business. So I think seeing entrepreneurs create real businesses, even if it's consulting, is inspiring. And then the second thing is because they're both PhDs in physics, I always grew up in this world of sort of science, even though, I'm non-technical and I didn't pursue science or engineering for my studies. But I came from a family, obviously, who are both PhDs in physics. And so it kind of made me feel like it's amazing what could be possible. And that was definitely inspiration for me when I came up with the idea for Shazam, because that was not possible at the time, but it felt to me sort of deep down that it should be possible.
You also had ADHD and dyslexia. How did that affect your childhood?
Yeah, you kind of, once you have ADHD and dyslexia, you have it for life. So I still have it, but it obviously impacts you the most in your years of education, because education systems are not set up to accommodate, especially back then, to accommodate these other ways of learning. I'd say that the main way it impacted me is that it made academics a little more difficult. So I certainly struggled a bit in academics, and I would make up for it by working harder and kind of my own sort of coping mechanisms and so on. So I still was able to study hard and get into UC Berkeley for college and engineering program there for about a year before I switched to economics and business. Yeah, I think, there's a great book for anyone who has dyslexia that I love called The Dyslexic Advantage. And what's amazing about it is you often hear about the challenges of dyslexia, which are certainly challenges in our traditional academic environment, but there are also superpowers that you get from dyslexia, I believe, and this book certainly highlights them. And the dyslexic brain operates in a different way, and it sort of processes information in a different way, and it can lead to really great creativity, as well as sort of other advantages and sort of I guess they call it sometimes big picture thinking. So being able to sort of see many, many variables into the future and kind of possibly have an advantage in what people might call having a vision or having sort of instincts about something.
That's a powerful mindset to have, that always looking at the glass as half full. Right, similar to what you did with dyslexia and ADHD, kind of looking at it as a superpower rather than a deficiency. Is that something that you would recommend other people do as they face similar challenges?
Definitely, I think that your kind of fundamental attitude in general is foundational to what you're able to accomplish. It's funny. I was just looking at some of the questions you have for at the end, rapid fire questions, and so it's a little early response here. You asked, "What's my greatest regret?" And I kind of thought, I can't think of a greatest regret, and it's because that's an attitude thing. Fundamentally, I don't have regrets. Sure, I make many mistakes, and yes, there's things I should have done, that could have done, but I don't have regrets about them because I think there's that positive attitude that it really gives you fuel when you're trying to be an entrepreneur and trying to build something new.
How can people develop that attitude? Because it really is an important step that a lot of founders and entrepreneurs discuss as being so central to their success. So how can one develop that?
I'm not an expert in that area of psychology. So, and it is fascinating how people sort of just seem to have the different ways of looking at the world. I do think that, when you spend your time with other people who are very positive, it can make you feel like that's a great way to see, a great lens to see the world through. And if you spend a lot of time with people who are a little bit fundamentally negative, it can be sort of draining. So I guess that would probably be the single biggest thing that I can think of that you could do is just trying to create situations where you're going to spend time with just crazy optimistic people.
Again, that's a notion that we hear a lot. Make sure you're spending time with the right people. A lot of people have their established groups of friends, people that they hang out with, whether or not that's at school, whether or not that's at work. How can you branch out now and find people who are driven, people who have the right attitude? How can you start hanging out with more people like that?
The community of people that listen to this podcast are, entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. And that community is an amazing community in general. Like if I were to go find 100 random people on the street and then go to some kind of entrepreneur conference and then pick 100 random people from that entrepreneur conference, that second 100 people would be far more optimistic and positive in general, because that's the kind of people that are attracted to the unknown, risk-taking, exciting world of entrepreneurship. So that could be a first step is putting yourself in those environments, going to entrepreneur groups. There's so many of these things, small ones, big ones, you name it, and putting yourself in those environments where you can meet new people.
Is that why you pursued an MBA at Berkeley, specifically to be around people like that?
In retrospect, definitely. But isn't it funny how a lot of our decisions are sort of, you could say they're serendipitous or whatever it may be. I think I was a little bit more career oriented in my thinking back then, and I was in management consulting prior to my MBA. And the traditional route within management consulting, you kind of hit a wall, and you need to get to the next level. You need to get your MBA. So it's a traditional route. I don't think I realized just how immersive and sort of rich the experience is in the MBA. That's the non-academic part of it, sort of the part of just being around a whole bunch of other students that are coming from different backgrounds and all have open minds towards repositioning what they're doing in their life. So yeah, and that turned out to be the even more valuable part of the MBA than the academics.
And did you intend on starting a company after graduating, or did you kind of use the MBA program as a stepping stool to get there?
Went into the MBA program, I was not intending to start a company. I think as I said, I sort of saw it as a career stepping stone and transition. I'm not sure exactly. It was either going to be, within consulting or stepping outside of consulting into various technology roles. And then once I started the MBA, then that's when I kind of had this sort of aha moment that I want to start a company. And that occurred in the first few weeks of the MBA program.
What was the aha moment? What made you decide that you wanted to start a company?
It was an empowerment moment, because starting a company seems like a really, really big thing. If you haven't already come to the conclusion that you want to start a company, it seems almost insurmountable. So it's often, why I think many of us don't do it. But I was in the computer lab. This aha moment occurred while I was in the computer lab at UC Berkeley MBA program, Haas School of Business. And then this is the first month of my 2-year MBA program. And next to me was another student. He was 1 year above me. So he was a second-year MBA. And I said to him, "What are you working on?" Just conversational. And he said, "Oh, I'm starting a company." And by the way, his company ended up going public. It was one of the early online real estate companies, but kind of has gone by the wayside since then. But it did go public. And anyway, so I said to him, "Oh, well, interesting. You're starting a company." And so then that seemed like just something I hadn't even considered. And I said, "Well, what did you do before business school?" Thinking that would provide the answer of how he had this capability to start a company. And he said, I was an Air Force pilot.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of thought, wow, he was an Air Force pilot. That has absolutely nothing to do with starting a company at all, especially an online real estate company. That made me feel like, well, if an Air Force pilot can start a company, why should I not start a company? So that was sort of the moment when I decided I also want to start a company.
Yeah.
By the way, that was not any statement against Air Force pilots, because I'm sure he had incredible discipline and focus, and I can't even imagine what it was like to be an Air Force pilot. Very impressive indeed. It's more that the sort of deep knowledge coming from an Air Force pilot is not related necessarily to running a company.
And do you recommend that path for aspiring entrepreneurs, to work in consulting before, or to pursue an MBA before, really to surround themselves with the caliber people that you did?
I think that's one of several paths that you can go down. So I definitely think the MBA, not everyone in an MBA program wants to be an entrepreneur, but once you go into some of these MBA programs, some of them have very strong entrepreneurship programs and courses. And so you can find the other aspiring entrepreneurs within the MBA program. So yeah, I think that's one place. But again, I think anywhere where entrepreneurs hang out is a good place to put yourself, which is many places.
I think that's a good segue into the founding of Shazam. How did you found Shazam? So you met your classmate. He was working on a company. You got really excited, and then what?
A couple of things. One is I had a couple relationships, friendships that I thought could become sort of co-founders. So I sort of, one of them was actually someone in my MBA class, and another one was a friend from just outside of the MBA program. And they're both people that I respected and I thought, were great people I could see working with. And so we talked about, hey, let's start a company together. So that's sort of one thing. It's sort of, I kind of felt like having co-founders gave me this feeling of comfort as a first-time entrepreneur, that we'd all be kind of trying to define this path together. And then the second thing is I went into sort of this brainstorming mode, because one of my superpowers, being dyslexic, is coming up with ideas. I'd like to think anyway. And so I started brainstorming all kinds of ideas. And it's not just coming up with ideas, but it's, as I mentioned, it's sort of that big picture thinking. So it's sort of seeing many, many steps ahead, kind of like chess a little bit, I guess, many steps ahead to see whether this idea is feasible and what kind of challenges you'd face, and could it play out to become something significant, and can you overcome all the hurdles and so on. So it's playing that little set of, I call it like almost painting a story essentially of the future, as a way of assessing whether the idea is a good idea, because otherwise you pick the wrong idea, spend a lot of time on it, and then kaput, it's no good. So I went into that kind of brainstorming mode, and those were like the two things, that sort of selecting these co-founders, and then kind of going through this ideation process. As sort of, as I said, it's both coming up with the ideas and then sort of assessing whether the ideas make sense. And then that led to the Shazam idea eventually.
How do you pick your co-founders?
That's a great question. I think you have to sort of select what's important to you. I would say some of the non-obvious things from my perspective, and it might be different from everyone's perspective, but number one, I think that there'd be a tendency to think you just need like an incredibly talented person. So obviously, why wouldn't you want an incredibly talented person as a co-founder? But I think that probably the two most important things from my perspective, number one was shared values, sort of. So, for me, integrity, number one, because it's amazing. You'll go through such tough times, and there'll be just these challenging decisions to make in challenging times. And if you don't have those shared values and integrity, as I said, is number one for me, then you're not going to make it through. So that was number one more than anything. So even above, are they incredibly talented? And then a second one is complementary. So really making sure that whatever they're good at is sort of very different than you, because you're going to be a few co-founders and you can each bring different things to the table. And then the final one, frankly, is just that you enjoy time with them, because you're starting a company. It's a life experience, and statistically, that company will probably fail, right? If you look at the statistics. So at a minimum, make sure you've enjoyed your time co-founding it with your co-founders. If all you get out of it is the fact that you tried to start a company which failed, But also, obviously, starting a company that succeeds is far better if you're doing it with people that you enjoy being with. So basically, people that you imagine being friends with.
You also spoke about the ideation of Shazam. How do you know when your idea is a good idea?
That's a tough one. It's probably one of the most difficult things as an entrepreneur is that, and it's something that you're not just evaluating at the beginning. You're sort of evaluating it endlessly. You're kind of reevaluating your idea, consistently, in a sense, and trying to figure out where's the kernel of the idea. I have different hacks of how to do that. I mean, there was an idea I came up with just the other day, and I was talking to my son about, hey, what do you think of this idea? And it's funny because he's just 15, but he was like, oh yeah, you got to do it. You got to do it. And now I realize I need to teach him about, no, you can't just do it. You got to like really evaluate, does it make sense to do? And so I started to research it, and I went to Google Bard and started asking questions to evaluate more does this problem really exist, and what are the solutions out there? So I think there's this whole process of what you do is you sort of come up with these ideas, and they can feel good, like good ideas. And then you really have to conduct the research then to understand what the opportunity is. Why hasn't it been done? Or if it has been done, why hasn't it been done well? And and that helps you open your eyes to what some of the barriers would be and risks. And I think there's some important things to think about also as an entrepreneur is this something that's good for a startup to do? Because, by the way, some things just fundamentally, the advantages to a large company are so great that it would be dumb for the entrepreneur to do it, if that makes sense. One example I love is there was a company that was actually valued at $1 billion, a startup company valued at $1 billion, unicorn company. And what it did is it looked at apps, like Android apps, and it would check to see if there's viruses and things, to check to see if they're safe. Now, great idea, super useful, and it was actually a very popular app, which is why it reached a $1 billion valuation. But the reason I think that was a bad idea for a startup is that that's actually something that really makes the most sense being done by the owner of the platform, Android, which is Google, because they obviously have incentive to make Google Play and Android successful and have no viruses and so on. And so no matter how good it was going to be, I feel like inevitably they would be made irrelevant once the platform decides to do it. And that's what happened. And so, that was many years wasted on something that really was not best for a startup to do, right? A lot of funding, a lot of venture capital, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from the entrepreneurs. So I think sometimes being able to play that out and say, is this something that a startup can do better than anyone else? And as opposed to something that's really just meant to be owned by the large companies.
In the ideation phase, how important is it to take into account, to take into consideration the perspectives and views of other people beyond just your immediate founding team?
Oh, extremely important. I mean, I think, I was just listening to an interview where someone was talking about Jeff Bezos in the early days and how he said, we're going to be the most customer obsessed company. And this is his very early interviews when Amazon was almost nothing. But if you think about what is he really saying there, we're going to be the most customer obsessed company. Well, what he's really saying is what we care about most is not our ideas, but the ideas of all the customers, right? Their opinions are what matter, right? Not yours. I mean, sure, you can have a vision. Even when Steve Jobs, led the development of the iPhone, which you could argue was not, it's not based on a bunch of market research. They didn't just ask customers what they want and then build that. They had a vision, right? A vision for what would be a great thing that people didn't realize they needed, but if they had it, they would love it. But you're still, even though you're not getting the ideas from the customers themselves, you are still serving the interest of the customers. You're thinking about, what Steve Jobs and the Apple team were thinking about is, what do people care about? What do they want? What resonates with them? What do they want to, how do they want to feel? What would they find satisfying? What would be very useful for them? And painting that story and then building that. So you are absolutely trying to step into the shoes of your customers.
Because I know for you, when you were founding Shazam, and this has been well documented, and you were speaking about it, you had a lot of pushback from a lot of people around you saying it was a bad idea. So how do you balance taking into account what people say in order to reform and change the product, but also kind of ignoring them and keeping your eye focused and keeping yourself set on the goal?
A key challenge for entrepreneurs is that balance. You're essentially doing two things that are in direct conflict with each other at the same time, all the time. And those two things are constantly keeping an open mind to reevaluate what you're doing based on the feedback you're hearing, but also keeping tremendous conviction so that when people push back on you, you don't give up. And you can see how they're in contradiction, right? And it's the balance of those two, optimizing that balance, that leads to the great outcome. So, as one example, let's imagine I go into a meeting, I pitch Shazam to a venture capitalist, and they say, that's a bad idea for this reason. They may not even say it they might just say that's a bad idea, and give a very general answer. And so I would actually dig. You can get incredible value from that feedback. And I would dig to understand why they're pushing back, why they have doubt, and why they don't think that something is feasible or a good idea. And then I would take that home with me. I'd be polite and sort of, politely either engage in further conversation or just acknowledge what they said. But the most important thing is they go back and it might cause me to rethink a little bit of my idea, rethink about how I'm going to do it, rethink some of the risks that there are, and maybe even rethink how I can mitigate those risks. Doesn't mean I'm going to give up on it, even if they think it's a terrible idea. And then many times I think, you know what, I just disagree with them. They don't think, I hear a great example I always love is all the venture capitalists that told Brian Chesky and Airbnb, like, look, no one's going to stay in a room in someone's house, and no one wants to do that. And no one wants to rent out a room in their house and have strangers stay in it. Right. So look, that's what they said. And he just, he and the other co-founders of Airbnb, they just didn't accept it. Right. They probably listened carefully, and it probably pushed them to innovate on actually what was the core, real groundbreaking breakthrough that enabled Airbnb to become successful, which is the most powerful user review system in the world that it enables the trust that's required between hosts and guests. And that is how they solved it. And that was the thing that was not obvious that they knew. So maybe it was even the feedback and the pushback from the venture capitalists saying this is not feasible that caused them to realize we have to do a really, really amazing job on harvesting these user reviews from both the guests and the hosts so that we can create this trust framework that makes Airbnb successful.
You experienced something very similar to what Airbnb did in terms of the naysayers and people doubting you. How did you keep the vision? How did you keep the company alive when you were getting so much negative feedback?
There was different layers. So there was inventing the technology. And then we had most people that were experts in signal processing telling us that wasn't feasible because of the noise and scale combined at the same time. So there's that feedback. And so we solved that by just trying to find the smartest guy we could to invent the technology, and then creating the encouragement so that he could invent it, because even he didn't know how to invent it. Then there was sort of the venture capitalists that were doubtful, would people even use this? And you have to keep in mind, this is, 8 years before apps existed when we came over with Shazam. So it was a phone call. You made a phone call to identify songs, and you got a text message with the name of the song back. That was the original version of Shazam. So it was hard for them to picture that people would use something like that, right? Because there were no apps, right? So people only made phone calls and sent text messages. Why would they identify songs with their mobile phone when there's no apps? So in that case, I just felt like they were not the visionaries. They're investors. Their main job is to put money in places where it grows. But their main skill set is not having a vision for what humanity wants to do, and what humanity really cares about. I mean, I'm sure they have opinions on it, but it's not necessarily their greatest skill. So I just I took it with 2 cents, as they say, or whatever. When I would get feedback of no one will ever use this, or that's just a feature, it's not a real product, or or it's never going to scale, or so on and so on. I just sort of disagreed, and moved on.
You're saying it's a matter of disagreeing and believing in yourself to the nth degree?
Yeah, it is. But as I said, I think it's important to keep that open mind and listen, because I've seen many entrepreneurs that actually err too far the other way, and that's a mistake, where they become so such big believers in their idea that they're actually not really listening to the feedback. In fact, they're not even really seeking the feedback. They'll often spend more time trying to convince you about their amazing thing they're building, rather than saying, "Hey, what don't you like about this? And that's where the real value comes from, by the way. If you're an entrepreneur, is sit down with people and say, what don't you like about this? Tell me, because people are resistant. They don't want to be negative. They want to be kind. And so they say, oh yeah, that's cool. But and I always like to say, no, you say it's cool, but tell me what you don't like about it. Why wouldn't you use it? If you wouldn't use it every day, tell me why you wouldn't use it every day, and really digging, to get the value, from people's feedback, and then thinking, and then using that information to think about how you can solve for those problems, right? How can you, for example, Shazam was a phone number, right? When we first launched. So I realized, oh my gosh, how are people going to remember this phone number, right? It's a phone number. It's not an app, right? So we kind of worked on that, and we came up with this idea of, actually with a great designer, we came up with the idea of a 4-digit number, not a full phone number, but just 4 digits, which required special partnerships with the mobile phone companies to get that. It's a bit like 411 or 911. So we had to get a 4-digit number. But then it was like, well, how are we going to get one that people remember? What's it going to be? 1 2 3 4 2 2 2 2. There's so many. And so we ended up getting the one on your dial pad that's in a straight line. That was a designer's idea. So it turns out there's only one 4-digit number that's in a straight line on a mobile phone keypad, and that's 2580. Going down the center of the keypad, and we thought, oh, that's memorable, because once you dial that, then later when you want to identify a song for your second time, a month later possibly, you'll be like, oh, it's that one that's in a straight line. I can't remember the number, but I remember it's in a straight line. So learning from the feedback, and then creating new ideas as a result of the pushback that you encounter.
That certainly was a big challenge that you had to deal with, overcoming the criticism that you got. But beyond that, what other challenges did you face, and how did you overcome them?
There were so many challenges. Gosh, recruiting amazing people, of course, to solve all the things that we had to solve, was challenging. And there was times when we had the wrong person to build the search engine originally, and then we had to get another person, and that's scary. When you're a startup, it's so different than being like Google, right? Where you make a mistake, and so you just invest a little more money and add a few more months and then redo it. But then a startup, it's like you just sort of have your runway, and then if you don't do it, you're probably hitting that brick wall and you're out of money. So the pressure is pretty great. Probably, the biggest challenge Shazam faced that people often don't realize is, or are not aware of as part of the story, is that because we were so ahead of our time, again, we had created an app, I like to say 8 years before apps existed. So, I came up with the idea of Shazam in late 1999. The iPhone launched in 2007. The App Store launched in 2008, right? So 8 years. Also, the iPod and iTunes, which is the world of digital music, those were also 2003 timeframe. So we're several years ahead of iTunes. So what happened with Shazam that we weren't expecting is that when we launched, so you could sit there and you could dial a number and you could identify songs and get a text message, but you couldn't download the song because there's no digital downloads. And you couldn't do all the things you do with apps, because there were no apps, right? So you couldn't see the cover art of the album. You couldn't read the lyrics. You couldn't add it to a playlist. You couldn't share it with a friend. You couldn't do any of these things. You couldn't do advertising, and so on. You couldn't watch the music video. You couldn't do any of those things because none of that capability was there without apps. So what happened? And the truth is that we launched, and frankly, it was really, really hard to get users. It was really hard because we had to, even though people liked this thing, it's like, wow, dial a number and identify a song. That's really cool. Getting that message out there to millions of people and change the behavior of millions and millions of people is extremely expensive. And so that was a massive challenge. So what we ended up with is I always like to say, not one bad year. And so think in any business, a bad year. At the end of a bad year, you go, wow, that was such a bad year. Now imagine 2 bad years. Now imagine 3 bad years. Well, we had 6 bad years. 6 years of barely surviving. And that period of 6 years is exactly from 2002 when we launched our service until 2008 when the App Store came out. So those 6 years, we just struggled as a business, and we almost went bankrupt. We had layoffs. We barely survived. It's amazing we're even around for the App Store to realize our vision. And it was all because of all the friction and the experience. You had to know a number, so there were no apps. You couldn't download a song. You'd have to take your text message down to a record store and show it to someone and say, I'd like to buy this CD. That was how you bought the music. So that's a lot of friction compared to just clicking download. You had to pay. We had to make money. So you had to pay each time you use Shazam. That's how we made money. So you had to pay 50 cents, basically 50 pence each time you use Shazam so there was all this friction, and we had to and frankly, the biggest thing, and this is something all entrepreneurs should always be thinking about, is changing user behavior. I mean, that's one of the hardest things. It's so hard that even huge companies with a lot of resources and like Google and Amazon and so on, even when they introduce a new product, if it involves changing user behavior, they have a really hard time getting the traction. So that was also very, very difficult. So we solved all these things. We survived by just finding ways to survive over those years, finding revenue from different I could spend sort of ages telling you, but all kinds of things like licensing and white labeling services and building business to business B2B services and all these other sort of ancillary revenue streams that we created to stay alive for all those years.
And so, like you said before, it's just a matter of believing in yourself, having the vision, and having the tenacity and willingness to stay on track to pursue that vision.
I was just going to say crazy perseverance. It's not just resilience, not just tenacity, and not just persistence or perseverance. It's really what I call creative persistence. So it's like this combination of just incredible, unrelenting persistence, but very importantly combined with creativity, so that you're not just banging your head against a wall, but you're actually trying to think outside the box to come up with these creative solutions.
I like that term, creative persistence. So based on all of your successes, all of your experience, all your failures, if you were speaking to somebody who's in high school or college right now, what would you tell them to best prepare them to be a successful entrepreneur?
The amount you can learn from hearing stories of other entrepreneurs and what they did and how they did it, I think is tremendous. And even though they're completely different businesses and they're different people, you still kind of end up absorbing these learnings, and you can map them to your own decisions. And so I think that would be my number one recommendation is listen to every episode of this podcast, and then go listen to the other podcasts out there that are you can research them, that are also great sort of interviews with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, by the way, who've met many entrepreneurs. Those interviews can also be great, and just and read books that are stories about founding companies and so on, and just absorb, because that's your real MBA. That's where you really get all the incredible learnings, and then suddenly you have the knowledge and perspective of having, it's almost as if you have been a serial entrepreneur, but it wasn't you. It's just that you've heard all the stories, and you have the benefit of that expertise and wisdom that you can then apply to your own startup.
And so would you give that same advice to people who are beyond college, who are now in their job and looking to succeed?
Absolutely. I mean, any part of your life, I don't think there's any part of your life where you just know it all now and you don't need to do that. I think you can always learn more.
And what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to aspiring entrepreneurs? How can one make big things happen? I know you speak about this a lot.
I think making big things happen, the framework that I have, it has several steps really in it. One is to come up with a breakthrough idea. And the breakthrough idea, usually comes, I believe, often from first principles thinking, because that's how you come up with something that's sort of revolutionary, not just from what we already have out there, what we already know about, but just thinking about what's your big idea that people haven't done, and start from those first principles. And I recommend anyone research and learn more about what first principles thinking is, because that's what's used by people like Steve Jobs, Henry Ford, and even Leonardo da Vinci. And then it's this sort of, it's really just to make a big thing happen, you then have to really have this incredible persistence and be creative. So sort of creative persistence of just solving, because you're going to hit so many obstacles. It's like just so many obstacles. You end up having to invent many, many ideas to get there. Then it's like, what is your insight? And by the way, one big venture capitalist that invests, I think it was Benchmark, has had many successful investments. He talks about the non-consensus insight. What is your insight? Like Brian Chesky from Airbnb had your insight that you have, but others don't have, and try to identify what that is, the thing that you see that others don't see, because that's often the great opportunity for us for making a big thing happen. Because remember, if it's a big thing that everyone knows that we need to do, well, then it's going to be harder for you to be differentiated, right? If you say, I'm going to make a battery for electric cars that just lasts much longer, well, of course, many, many companies have realized that. Unless you have some big insight on how you're going to do that others don't see, you're not really onto something that other people are not onto. So it's really figuring out what is the big insight you have that others don't have. I call that picking your obsession. And then I really like to say eliminate friction. I mean, eliminate friction, like make things easier. Friction almost killed Shazam. And if you look at so many successful companies, I guarantee you will find that one of the biggest reasons they were successful is they eliminated friction. They made something easier. Or removed effort. And often they had to really, really go to incredible lengths to remove that effort for others. I call it moving mountains. But whether it's Dropbox making easy file storage in the cloud, or Airbnb making it easy to stay in someone's house, or whatever it is, it's eliminating the friction that often leads to the success. Even Stripe for payments made things easier for developers, right? And they became a huge company. And then powering through it. I mean, you have to believe in it. You have to be personally connected to this experience. It's not just about, oh, I want to make a lot of money, or this is going to look really good on my resume, or it can't just be a financially driven thing. It's got to be something that you're like emotionally connected to. It's like your dream. It's something that it's your sense of purpose. I like to say you need to feel the impact that you have. That's how you get so personally connected. How does this impact other people's lives? How is this changing the world? And then feel that impact. And that's how you get so personally connected to it. And those are the steps to making something big happen. And I think, and that's what, any entrepreneur, and frankly, anyone even just trying to be a superstar in a large company can do.
The last question before we get to the rapid fire questions is, what is the biggest mistake that you see people make, and how can they avoid it?
I think that often the biggest mistake, in my opinion, is this fail to eliminate friction. It's amazing to me how often it happens. I mean, we all sit around saying, "Oh, look at Apple, what a successful company," and we all know why. They make things simple and easy and beautiful, and yet we don't do the same thing. Otherwise, we'd all be Apple. And so what we tend to do is we tend to remove effort for ourselves, not for others. And so often, if you want to remove that little bit of effort for others, which is eliminating friction, it's going to require a lot of effort for yourself to do that. And we don't. We kind of go, oh, it's okay. They can register this. They can click this. They can wait for this. It's because if we were going to try to eliminate the thing where they have to click, that would be extremely hard for us to do. And so we make them click. And then by doing that, we're introducing friction, and we're holding back the potential of whatever we're building.
And by the way, just so you know, a quote that you said that really forever resonates with me is that, in addition to that mistake, you said that one of the biggest mistakes people make is to think that what you did yesterday will be sufficient for tomorrow. And I want to say I really do live my life by that. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful quote.
Yeah, no, I think, you have to always be thinking about the future, right? You definitely have to be thinking ahead, what could be possible, right?
So on to the rapid fire questions. What is the first song you Shazammed?
I was digging, I saw that question, and honestly, I can't remember. We had a small database of 1,000 songs that we used when we were first testing out the Shazam technology that we had invented. So there were 1,000 songs on that list, and I was trying all of them, but I honestly can't remember that. So I don't have a good answer for you on that one.
Okay. What is your favorite song and your favorite artist?
I'm going to name one that I like a lot. It's definitely one of my favorites. It's called Elbow. That's the name of the artist. They're from the UK. I would put them in the category of Radiohead and Coldplay and things, but not as famous. The song that I love by them, so everyone should listen to this song and listen to it a few times, and then you'll decide if you love them. It's called One Day Like This. It's a great song. Elbow. And
what is a quote that you live by?
I brought this up in some of my keynote speeches. I love this one from a British journalist from the 1800s. His name was Walter Bagehot. And he said, the greatest pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do.
I like that. And what has been the key to your success?
I'd say it's creative persistence, honestly. I mean, I apply it not just, I apply it in everything. Even in my personal life, even when it came to finding an apartment to live in San Francisco, and when it was really hard to find apartments. I mean, it's really is that creative persistence. So it's just being tenacious, but also just being very creative along the way.
What is the key to creative persistence, right? You speak a lot about important of being persistent, being creative, but a lot of people, it's difficult to develop those traits. What is the key to developing that creative persistence?
It's an attitude. So I took improv classes at one point, and in improv, one thing you learn is yes and. I don't know if you've come across that. So as you're talking in improv with other improv actors, you have to basically say, whatever they say, you say yes and you're taking it forward rather than blocking it. And unfortunately, what we tend to do out in the world is that we tend to say no instead of yes and. I always like to say the easiest answer is no, right? So, I mean, I faced this all over the place. And so you can ask someone to do something, and if they don't know what the answer, how to do it, or they don't have the time to do it, they'll just say no. And we tend to default to no. If we don't see the path forward, we tend to default to no, because it would be exhausting to constantly try to invent a solution, how we're going to get there. But I think it's changing that mentality. That's what creative persistence is. It's like, it's training your brain, and it's really hard to do. But as soon as you see an obstacle that feels like a no, it's something that we tend to respect, that obstacle, like an authority. You have to immediately be thinking, okay, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. What is a way? If there's saying it can't be done, and if it seems like it can't be done for this reason, let's just keep thinking, what is a way that you could be done, and just really kind of starting with a blank slate and open mind, and kind of out of the box thinking, and just kind of coming at it from different angles, and taking that as your habit rather than that. Oh, it looks like it can't be done. It's a mental state. It's a mental state that you need to, and I think you have to almost train yourself to get in that state, to always remind yourself, catch yourself if you find yourself saying no, it can't be done. If you find yourself saying that and then just giving up, you've caught yourself in a bad habit.
And last, what book do you recommend?
Well, maybe I'm biased because I spent 8 years at Google, and I was fascinated by how they redefined almost everything, not just technology. And so I read one book about Google that was actually written by the former CEO and the former vice president of products from Google, Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg. It's called How Google Works. It's full of great learnings and insights that I think any entrepreneur can make the most of as they build their business. So How Google Works.
Well, that makes sense. Thank you again, Chris, for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking with you, hearing your words of insight, your incredible words of advice. You're wonderful. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you want to hear from.